And boom, there we go. We start on time. We try to end on time here as well. So we'll go ahead and kick it right off. Today's Wednesday, September 25th, and this is Interop Workshop. This is a technical discussion that is about healthcare data interoperability. And the goal of this is to facilitate interoperability overall. Obviously, we do a lot of it, but we want to encourage it done correctly for everybody. It's courtesy of Zen Healthcare IT, obviously, and I will guarantee everybody on the call and everybody watching, this is the most fun that you can have while you're still talking about healthcare data interoperability. So just write it down. I said it. It is. I am the host of this, as well as the CEO of Zen Healthcare IT. My name is Jim Benson. With us today, as usual, is not only some of the team that we have overall, but we've got Ron Wilson, who is the VP of engineering product development around here, and overall guy that we try to stump the chump with. And we, well, we failed fairly badly at that in the past, but we're going to get him, by God. That's all there is to it. And we also have the special guest of being Derek Wayland, I should say, who is the VP of IT and security around here as well. Certainly with the topic that we have today, it's important to have his input as well. And we want to thanks to everybody who has participated and is participating on this. We're seeing people come in. I will go ahead and ask everybody, as perfect timing here, turn your cameras on, please, if you can. Turn your microphones on. This is an interactive forum here. Don't be bashful about it. We want to have your input, and don't hesitate to interrupt and say, "Hey, I got a question about," because that's what it's all about here. Is really making sure that we're getting people's questions rather than you listening to us just drone on. Don't do that. That's not nearly as much fun for you or for us. So be part of what we're doing here. Don't be bashful. This is the 9th episode that we have in this series, and we've talked a lot about the national networks and other characteristics here. And last week, we developed a topic for last week, which was all about doing it yourself, DIY. That is interoperability, DIY. And just in high level summary of last week, we talked about a number of topics that most anybody involved in this at all would kind of go, well, duh. And they are kind of duh moments or duh topics, if you will. Until they're not, until you try to do them at scale, and until you get into it, and more than a particular, just a particular pile of that. So we talked about a number of characteristics, and as we got going in that we realized, as we try to time things out so that we start on time and we end on time. We got into it, and we suspected that it was going to take a little while longer than the hour. And we were right. So last week we got through criticality overall. That's criticality, security, and maintenance. And let me follow up on each one of those just a little bit so that you know where we were coming from. The criticality of doing these connections to your business. How critical are they? Does it need to be up day and night? What are the downstream impacts from it? What is at stake? And sometimes it really is lives at stake. So you got to take this stuff very seriously. What are your uptime requirements, and when should you go, wait a minute, if it's that important and it's got to be up, maybe we should be getting some help with regard to that. We talked about security, and remember the differentiation here, that if you're doing this internally for a large hospital organization, let's just say for example, and you're handling both sides of the connectivity, basically Dixie cup and string, and you've got hands in both Dixie cups, you're in reasonably good shape there, depending, but for the most part that's the case. When you start getting into where you only have control of one of those Dixie cups And Billy, the new guy over there at the other organization, doesn't have some of the acumen that you might have. It's something to really consider and take another look at. Certainly at scale, that's the case. We looked at VPNs and other connection management overall, security authentications, everything from password management to SSL security management, certificate, I should say, management. And then, so your exposure to the internet overall, and how to consider some of those zero trust characteristics. And then we started talking about maintenance, and all of that stuff that I covered right there consumed the hour, and we probably could have gone another hour just on those topics alone. So I say all that for two things. One, if you're interested in what we talked about and want to find out a little bit more about it, get part of the recording or whatever the case happens to be, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be happy to provide you a link or other excerpts from it, whatever the case happens to be, because we want you to be informed on that. The other characteristic that I wanted to mention is just a note from me as I was putting together and prepping for this one and the notes overall. We've had many times over the course of our 9 years of doing this where we've gotten on to those kind of topics that I was just talking about, where people have said, well, we really already do that stuff internally, so it's not a big deal for us to just continue to do it. And of course, that's very true. However, until it's until it's not, the characteristics of scale of doing this can sneak up on you in a big way, and doing it at scale is a very, very different thing. So I just want to reinforce with you that things like we've talked about in previous ones, national networks. You get on the national networks, and if you've never done it before, you probably don't realize that incoming requests to you are not gated. They can hit you at any time, and it is a de facto denial of service attack, or certainly can be. And if you don't know that that's coming, you got a problem. And Ron can certainly, and Derek both can tell you a whole lot about that. We have in previous episodes. So again, don't hesitate to reach out if you have other questions with regard to that. So we tell you, I've taken a little bit more time than I ordinarily would to cover previous topics, but I wanted to make sure that everybody here and that might be listening in the future kind of knows where we're coming from, because otherwise we'd be starting right in the middle. So what we're doing here today is part 2 of DIY, interoperability DIY. It's great, and we do encourage people to do it. We can't be all things to all people, and we don't want to be. So it is great, and there are a lot of open source tools that are great to do it. It is great until it's not, and this is where this is discussion on those topics and what to look out for. So part 2 here covers scalability and complexity, compliance, disaster recovery, and management costs and unexpected costs here overall. So we'll jump right in here at this point. So let's talk, guys, a little bit more about scale and complexity and planning and all of those kind of things. So let's start off, Ron, if you will, talking a little bit more about open source Mirth Connect, and it's good, and all of a sudden, what happens when you can't even measure how many messages you're getting, or those kind of characteristics? I'll throw the microphone to you for a couple minutes.
Yeah, certainly. So, Zen has worked over the years with lots of different types of organizations in various hosting solutions, from self-hosted to Azure to AWS and Google Cloud. We've really been in all of the environments and looked at these DIY interoperability implementations. And one of the critical elements with interoperability and message exchange, if you've used Mirth Connect, you can get what we call a stuck message as an example. And then you can configure your retries as an example in a certain way. And we've seen systems where, from a Thursday to a Monday, they had 8 million ADTs get sent through from an endpoint to their cloud hosted solution. And it was basically just the same message over and over and over continuously. Um, One of the aspects of, capacity planning is understanding, your growth rate, the surge rate. We've experienced payer-based integrations where on an annual basis in March, typically, all of a sudden we'll see 400,000 CCDAs on an integration, and on the monthly it's 3,000. Right. And so it's just exponential volume and size of message, right? CCDAs can be really, very large. And these are typically all gotchas in that DIY, presentation, because on the month to month, you're adding new integrations, you're building them up. Maybe the tech team doesn't know about the workflow specifically, or the nature of the way it's going to work. They don't have effective monitoring. I mean, monitoring is something that Derek and I spend, I can't even count the hours that we spend on monitoring needs and what we're looking at and why we're looking at it. And then, doing retros on that to add more evaluations. But you can have the problem in an internally managed solution also. So we're not exclusively throwing, cloud solutions under the bus. It's a function of, I've defined X resources, whether that's 2 CPU and 8 GB of memory and 200 gigabytes of hard disk, and something happens and you don't have visibility into, you're at 130% CPU. Your swap is 4 times what it should be, as an example. Your hard disk is bouncing off the limiter and you're starting to fail messaging or corrupt the database. That's the ultimate failover, or death knell, is you run out of disk space and then you corrupt the Mirth DB, and then you're in real trouble. And we've fought that battle with client systems before too. And typically it's because of that growth or that unknown volume, or that stuck message problem, right? Or some kind of a bad loop that gets injected into a message processing cycle.
Yeah, there's just so many areas of observability that you have to think about beforehand. Certificate expirations, like if those are in Mirth Connect, those kind of become invisible. Just from like receiving messages from the front end, that's just a metric of the load balancer. You have no idea what the application is doing at that point. So there's a lot of injection points that you need to start observing in order to determine the bottlenecks or issues, like the queued message that, or like a stuck message that Ron is talking about. There's just a lot of spots that you have to look at. And what some organizations do when they stand up their own Mirth Connect, for example, in a cloud environment, is that they stand up the database, and that's the last time they ever think about the database. They just stand it up, they connect to it, and that's that. Now their focus is on Mirth Connect. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into the database as well to get your solution as performant as and scalable as possible.
I mean, for years, Jim, I coined this term probably 8 years ago. Mirth Connect is just lipstick on a database application, honestly, right? It really is. It's all about the DB, and it's all about the persistence of messaging. Now, you can run Mirth Connect without message persistence, but I don't want to be anywhere near that machine.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be able to troubleshoot anything. You're not going to, you're not going to have any content. You're not going to be able to speak to any issues or problems. But so we all run in production mode, quote unquote, and everything gets persisted to the DB, and it does it by the 10x. It's 10 messages for every message that go to the database.
So it's a very nice shade of lipstick, no doubt.
Yeah, it is. It's beautiful.
Everybody likes it, but it is lipstick and not necessarily that underneath. So just kind of summing up that that discussion right there a little bit. Most everything with regard to DIY really depends on your ability to anticipate the use case the effects of the use case that you're doing, a national network versus an ADT versus whatever the case happens to be. You've got size of messages that are processing, quantity of messages that you're processing. What do you own that other Dixie cup, or is that out in the wild there? In terms of the complexity of the database, your obviously load balancing and firewall comes into play in a big way. And if you don't have if you've got all of those pieces that you know and you can plan for and you've experienced it before, good for you, great. But if you don't, you probably should time out and ask those questions before you do. What we see so many times is plowing ahead, making a great big pile of sticks, and then finding out that the thing is fragile, or your RTO, which we'll talk about here in a couple of minutes, RPO is not where it needs to be, or even worse, you get that call in the middle of the night and the wheels have come off, and now everybody's breathing down your neck to do something about it. So it's everything from database tuning to what all those characteristics are really absolutely key in doing it. The other thing and we talked about this a little last week, is understanding just how critical it is that this process be up. Are you looking at 2 nines, 3 nines, 4 nines? Derek, I will give you credit for this. I believe you put this in the notes. If you're looking for a 3.9 figure uptime requirement or more, you should really think about whether you really want to do this internally or not. Again, it depends. I want to make sure that we're saying to everybody, we are not bad mouthing DIY at all. As a matter of fact, the purpose of this is to give you insights on how to do it and make sure that you're putting yourself in a position to win. But there are constraints that are on it that you should be aware of.
Yeah, relative to that RTO, RPO, we had a client that had a homegrown solution, and they were using a rubric backup. And they'd fire that rubric back up about midnight, and for about 3.5, 4 hours long into their homegrown DIY solution, they'd been running for years, but they were adding and adding and adding, and they finally added this one integration where they were getting large volumes of CCDAs inbound, and their rubric process went from running an hour to running like 7 hours. And that rubric process just killed performance. And they brought us in to go, why is this? What is going on? This keeps going down, those kinds of things. And so that goes back to that concept of capacity and scalability. And, one of the things I see very common is folks don't look at the archetype of their integration very effectively. And they just start throwing everything into one MC, or they go, oh, it's prod 1 and prod 2. And they've got HL7 messaging in some, and CCDs in others, and Fire in others, and then back office integrations in them. And you really got to start to look at, how do we configure that MC unit to be the most effective?
Right.
If you're just processing HL7 messaging, ADTs, SIUs, ORUs, you typically don't need a large amount of XMX memory. But a CCD machine or Fire, where you're serializing large data objects, you need a lot of XMX memory. So now you've got this pattern where every one of your devices have to have large volumes of resources, because you're blending the traffic and the archetype of the messages together versus focusing them. ADT system, or HL7 V2 machine, HL7 V3 machine, back office machine. And they can all have little tweaks in Dobbs and Niles, right, Jim? Turned and tweaked to make them work better, rather than having 3 devices with 16 CPU, 96 gig of RAM, 16 gig of XMX, just crazy sized machines, when you might get away with a third of that for an ADT machine or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, even furthering that is because in Mirth Connect, for example, depending on how you use the integration, that resource count can be greatly impacted by your engineers that are working inside of Mirth Connect. So if they're not following best practices, you might think you need 16 gigs on a VM, 8 CPU, but really it's because somebody's putting the entire message into memory to process it a second, third, fourth time. You see it all the time
Yeah.
in channels where people are just taking the message, creating a copy of it, which is another IO hit for your disk. And then if you're putting into memory, that could compound your memory consumption as well. So there's a lot that goes into the I work closely with the engineers because I have a lot of visibility into the system resource consumption, and I have to work very closely with them to ensure that what they're creating in Mirth Connect is the best for efficiency and scalability from a holistic approach.
Couple of comments. One, when we start talking about Dobbs and Niles, you know we're having some fun here now because that's great. Two, what Derek was just talking about and around as well is one of the characteristics that I've got down below. When you're doing this yourself, you've really got to start asking the questions of what part of the connectivity is ITsec related. It's secure and connectivity and performance related, and what is it of your interop engineers that are doing it? There's two different skill sets, and if you've got both of those skill sets and they can interact well, good for you. But if you don't necessarily have both of those roles clearly defined and the responsibilities of them, that's another indicator that you might want to rethink how you're doing this. Now, of course, a lot of people do, but not everybody does, and certainly depends on the type of organization that's trying to do it, obviously. Quick housekeeping for everybody that's on the call here. I'm curious if you want to put something in chat, or just unmute yourself and let us know. I'm kind of curious whether wow, and that just jumped right out of my head where I was going with that. Wow, it really did. So I'm going to move on for a second. It'll come back to me here in just a second. It happens. I'm old. What are you going to do? The compliance aspect of it. Let's change gears here for just a moment. Logging requirements and vulnerabilities and those kind of characteristics. We all know that there's a lot of rules and regulations with regard to doing this overall. When one of the questions that you have to ask is, okay, so you got it all set up and it's going and everybody's happy and you're going into the weekend, you're looking forward to it. And how are you going to know whether there is a vulnerability that has been discovered and it affects your systems? Got a log of all the systems that you're using, hopefully, and the versions that are there. Do you have, Derek, how do you monitor and overall as the security compliance officer that we've got here to know where there are vulnerabilities and that they need to be patched and how extensively or how badly it needs to be done right away? How do you do that?
In multiple areas. There are a lot of spots when it comes to vulnerability management. And the most important thing when it comes to security is that it's part of the solution from the beginning. So our SDLC process tracks vulnerabilities using a vulnerability database, and we address them and load them into our risk management process, where we actually track all of the vulnerabilities, score them, dictate where they actually exist, next action items, or mitigation, that kind of thing. So that's for our SDLC process, but we consistently run external vulnerability scans, internal vulnerability scans with up-to-date vulnerability databases in order to keep track of any new vulnerabilities that are discovered. Anything that's discovered gets scored in our risk register, and then we address it based off of that score. If it's scored at a low level that doesn't require any sort of additional mitigation, we accept it and move on. If it breaches a certain threshold, we have to take on a new process to address the vulnerability and confirm that it is in fact gone after the fact. So we do 2 bits of scoring as well: pre-risk mitigation and post-risk mitigation, if there are any mitigation tasks required.
Got it.
So
And
it's involved is
yeah.
the quickest way to put that. It is an involved process.
And because we're in the business of connecting external organizations, it's paramount, very paramount. All right, I did have a senior moment there a moment ago. Sorry to admit it, but it's true. But I do have, I did remember what it is, so I'm not going down yet. The question that I had for people is, we talk a lot about a lot of things. We also did last week, or 2 weeks ago when we had the other meeting. And I think I talked about getting, putting together a list of these topics for things that would give you the ability to go, oh yeah, here's the list of things that I should be checking, and do I have, and just where am I in that list? Would that be helpful to everybody? And that's what I was going to ask in the chat. So if you guys don't mind, either come off mute and speak up and let us know what your thoughts are, or put it in the chat or something, if you'd like us to create a list of the topics that we're talking about here, and make that available to you. Because I mean, otherwise you got to rely on your notes and you might miss stuff, and we're happy to provide you the list if it'll help. So by all means, I'll pause for a second. Anybody want to? There's, oh, Scott, but put something in chat. Fantastic. Thank you, Scott. List would be helpful. Anybody else? There you go. Never turn down a free resource, right? Fantastic, Mike. We'll be glad to do that. So what we'll do is go through the recording from last week, if we haven't done that already, and search it. We'll use that AI capability, come up with a list of things here, and we'll be sure to make that available, reach out to you and let you know of those things. So we'll do that and finish that on this one as well. All right, back to the agenda that we've got overall. And one of the other characteristics that I wrote down, and Derek, thank you for the details there, is, do you know how long it will take to fix it? Because that goes back to that RTO, RPO. Are you going to have downtime for that? Do you have that kind of redundancy? We'll talk more about that in a minute. I put a business note in the compliance things as well, and that is insurance, the thing that we all love to hate until we need it, and then we don't hate it so much. And that is, and I know this firsthand because I deal with it a lot more than I want to. I keep trying to give it to the staff and they won't take it. Is the insurance overall, certainly the business insurance, but the cyber insurance. If you are doing this and you haven't looked at your insurance or sat down with your insurance broker and really given them visibility into how much traffic you have, how many connections you have, what is your real vulnerability with regard to that, you run a pretty good sized risk of being underinsured, or think you have insurance where you really don't have that coverage. And that's a very, very dangerous thing in this world, because it only takes one mistake. We all know. So I have gone through it multiple times, and obviously we're in the business of doing it, so it's really critical to do that. It was also a big part of our high trust certification to ensure that we had all the answers that we needed to, and to get the proper insurance in place. So while nobody expects you to become an insurance guru, and hopefully you don't, we'll leave that to the people that want to do that stuff. We're glad to have them, but I'm not one of them.
Jim, relative to the cost on that, it doesn't persisted or held data have a germane effect to the cost or the risk?
That's a damn good question, Ron, and we didn't even write that one down. Yeah, that's exactly the case. Obviously, the exposure vector that you have is compounded exponentially if you are storing things from multiple sources. Now, again, we're in the business of doing it, but we, and Derek, yells at me when I use the word air gap, because it's not truly air gapped in the way that it is, but it is segregated so that it cannot be commingled one to the other. And we do that throughout our systems. You should consider doing the same thing, but we don't store data unless it is specifically called out for the client that they want us to. So we monitor that very, very carefully, and you should too. It is a great question. It is a question that if your insurance agent or company knows what they're talking about, they will ask you about that. And it's another one that you need to have the straightforward, correct answer to, because just hand waving that or putting that in, we'll just tell them this amount and what have you. That's a really bad idea, because
where this really came into play from an engineering perspective, we had a consulting customer a few years ago that had a very large MC instance that ended up not having any message purge process. And they had an MC database that was 10 terabytes. They'd never deleted a message out of the MC. They had channels that were in the terabyte size. The tables were a terabyte in size. So your message retention, MC is a transient message manipulation tool. It's not a retention tool. It has exposure to SSH and all kinds of, communication protocols. When we talk about those attack vectors, you've got 8 source connector types that can get access to an MC system. That's a lot of attack vector from, risk, security problems. So where this comes into play is how you configure your channels. Right? You should have a reasonable retention, 3 days for message content, 35 days for metadata. Get that stuff out of your system. You're exposing yourself with millions and millions, trillions of messages that someone could get a hold of, and that, could be millions of lives, right? Which really.
Sorry, Ron, didn't mean to cut you off there, but isn't it the case that if you're using Mirth Connect in the normal way that is, obviously it's a tool that can be used for a lot of different ways, you're probably putting that data, the ultimate data, in another system, a CDR, what have you. So you don't need it in the Mirth DB.
You don't need that much in the Mirth DB at all. You might say, we're going new live with an integration. Let's keep it for 30 days because you got the email hockey problem, right? Back and forth. But at some point you gotta go in and pull that back and say, we need to look at messaging from a Friday to a Tuesday. That's enough. If we can't trap it in a communication cycle, we'll have to get the next occurrence of it, right? Or whatever the issue might be. But that's a very common problem that folks go from a test environment to prod. They don't move the channel stack from development to prod. So there's constant retention. And they're just saving messages and messages. And what that's doing is growing the database, impacting performance, impacting resources, but it also speaks to this insurance comment, right? You are putting your company at risk, and your principals don't even know. They're under your principals, your C-level is going to be thinking, well, you're just dealing with messages in there. No, you're turned it into a message store now. And that's not an archetype or an event model that they're thinking when they're talking to their insurance guy, right?
Oh, absolutely. And think about it this way, to folks. I think it's really important. At the scale that we do, we've got Derek and his team that is monitoring this stuff. There's kind of a second set of eyes over the integration engineers, and lots of people that are watching this have very good integration engineers. But what will happen is that they will set things up. They're going to do their testing. They're going to promote it to get it where it needs to be. And woohoo, good for them. They're going to promote it to prod. They're going to watch it carefully and make sure that it's there. And they're going to have those settings so that it is retaining those things and they can troubleshoot. And then they're going to be called to get on the next one and the next one. And even though that you had that idea that we're going to prune to begin with, they never come back around. It's not on your project plan. to look at that a day, a week, a month, whatever that is after the fact and go, we need to reset that setting. It's out of sight, out of mind at that point. So your project plan for any new integration needs to include those things that are coming back and validating that you're no longer in development mode, you are in a production mode, and those settings are going to be different. And they need to be looked at regularly, because just because you got a certain connection up and going and your channel or series of channels that are working fine right now, next month, are they still? Has something changed with regard to it? Has the volume gone up, et cetera, et cetera? So it is a constant plate spinning battle to go back to those configurations, look at where they are, and make sure that it's still performing the way that you want it to.
That use case for that customer, we were making recommendations on how to help some performance and things. And the first thing that we came to was, okay, you got to break this system down. Everything that's on here is too big. And we kind of went over like, how is a system built? But this is going to get into the next topic, which is the RPO and the recovery, right?
Right.
So you could build a system in three forms. You could do a bare metal install. You've got a box sitting over on the corner. It's on your network. You just go over and install Mirth Connect on Windows and put a database on it and run with it.
Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. But it happens, right? You could have a VM, a raw native VM, Linux, Windows, either or, doesn't matter. And you could manage it that way. Then you could do containerization, right? And the size of that database, when we go back to those risk evaluations, the size of that database has a direct impact on your ability to upgrade, migrate, rebuild, all of those things. And it's really a critical concept you have to keep in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
This is why at Zen, both Ron and I have different sides of this. Like I want absolutely nothing retained in the messages, and I'm constantly trying to push Ron and team to figure out a solution to retain nothing. Don't retain anything, only turn it on unless you're debugging something. So it puts Zen in a good balance of the best of both worlds, of retain as much as we need, but just enough to, or just retain as little as possible so that we're as performant as possible, but can still troubleshoot.
And it speaks to, access, right? Least privilege access, same concept, right? You don't need admin to everything. You don't need 10 years worth of messaging in Mirth Connect. There's solutions to go throw that stuff off into something else that's not, attached to everything in the network, right?
Yeah, what if that particular 10 terabyte database got breached?
Right.
That is a horrendous database to just have sitting out there with who knows how many individualized records that you will be held accountable for. So get it out of the Mirth Connect database. There's no point leaving stuff in there.
And we say stuff like that, and I'm sure everybody on the call just probably rolled their eyes and went, duh.
Who would do that?
Except you'd be amazed how many people do. It happens.
When I got the discovery on that, we Zen has some tools to help people fix things like this and hunt down problems and things. I'm looking at this report and I was just holding my head. I was like, I called Brian, I called Marilee. I'm like, this is not going to be a good conversation at all. I mean, but it happens organically, is what
Yes.
happened. Bob was hired 5 years ago. Bob stood the machine up. Bob got promoted. Dave becomes the guy that's handling it. You got two new integration engineers. Nobody really knows what's going on with it. It's working, and then it's not. And then that's when they go, well, what's wrong? Well, let's start here.
Right.
You're on Mirth 3.6. And we're in the 4.5s now, guys. You're on Postgres 9.2. Okay, guys, that's 16 years ago. we got to move things along for security reasons, feature, function, performance enhancements, bug fixes. We tried that.
Yeah.
The database backup took 39 hours and blew up. Oh, yeah, well, it's 10 terabytes. That's why, I mean,
And it is, everybody might make fun of it, but it does sneak up on you. And that goes to, maintenance of the tools that you're using and the planning of it. Now, everybody that's on the call that has, been in this, probably in the business, otherwise we're not that funny. So I'm pretty sure you're in the business. You didn't come for the humor. But it's, so you're doing it, in your in-house non-interoperability stuff. Hopefully you are, and you've got teams that can do those kind of things and maintain versions. But it is critical that you had not depend just on that of what you would do internally, because this is exposed by definition to the outside world. So the maintenance of it, the protocols that you put together to maintain it as it grows and be able to identify where those weaknesses maybe not be today, but they might be in 6 months or a year from now. And when it goes bang, you don't want to be standing there. That's not the position that you want to be in. So let's talk about it going bang. No, say it ain't true. Say it ain't so. Yeah, disaster recovery. And clearly we knew before, but we really learned, Derek can attest to this, from going through our HITRUST certification back 3.5 years ago that we were doing it. Wow, what an eye-opening experience that was. If you haven't had the thrill of going through HITRUST, it is not fun, but it is eye-opening and you learn a lot. And if you embrace it, go into it with that mindset and embrace it, it makes you a much better organization. So there's my promotion for HITRUST certification. I won't go further down that path. But one of the characteristics in it that is really important is of the 19 different domains that we have, it's probably in 3 or 4 or 5 of them. I don't know, Derek knows it better than I do, but it's disaster recovery. What do you do in terms of redundancy, failover, being self-healing, RTO, RPO? Hopefully everybody knows what that is. Recovery time objective and recovery point objective. Everybody, hands in the air. Anybody not familiar with those concepts? Hopefully everybody is, but I don't want to presume. I had to learn it. I didn't know. Anyway, one of the questions that that I would have just from the start to know whether you need to be paying attention to this is answering this question honestly. When was the last time you did an actual DR drill and successfully came out the other side, knowing that you could go into this weekend and the wheels could come off and you could put Humpty Dumpty back together again?
that's a big problem in the marketplace in general, right? I mean, we just learned this with a couple of the most recent snafus, right? The Microsoft one with the security company, right? I mean,
Right.
there were folks offline for weeks, I mean, literally weeks.
It's
So
it's a huge one. And then the question is, okay, you've got the RTO and you've got the RPO and you've got them. Okay, you've got DR where you want it to be. Now, can you answer the questions that it was a real incident that caused it, what it was, and are you prepared for the inspection for it?
goes back to the log retention question. How many
Right.
folks are actually retaining their Mirth Connect logs into a log retention solution that allows you to search it? It's immutable. It's persisted. You're monitoring it for attack vectors. Those kinds of things, or at least you're capturing everything to do the retrospective, the RCA, to say, oh, there it is. That was it right there.
Right.
One of the big things we see in Mirth Connect nowadays is security companies doing penetration testing on Mirth Connect, right? And so you'll see 8,000 hits that are coming in on a particular channel because it's been disclosed by the source that's going to do the pen testing that that's open to, somebody. And you'll see you look at the messaging that comes in on one of those pen test executions, it'll blow your mind what they're actually trying to prevent. Little bitty things that you would never think were a risk, but headers, encapsulated JavaScript, which is a spooky one. They're putting JavaScript in the URIs, in the parameters, all of those things. So and those errors, because they error typically, because your integration isn't handling them, or you are failing it intentionally because it's using a context path that you don't support in your application. Meaning, I only support these 4 context paths for this HTTP feed. If I get anything else, puke it.
Right.
Well, if you end up with your log retention, you can start to zero in on that. And most folks aren't doing that. They're just letting those logs roll over, pile up, and disappear, which is bad. That's bad news.
When was the last time you had a pen test on it? And you certainly, hopefully, have told the organization, that external organization that's going to do it for you, get after it. Those are the good guys. Those are the white hats, as you know. And even though you don't want a bad answer out of it, you want to know the bad answer and fix it before you can, before some bad actor that hits you with it. So,
and the other thing, don't pen test somebody else's system without calling them, please. You're going to wake me up and you're going to make my head explode because I think something's wrong. Don't do that.
No, that really is, that's just bad form.
It happens a lot. A lot of our, that actually happens. That's happened in the last year about 4 times where we've been penetration scanned and vulnerability scanned through the VPN as well. So it's really important to let your hosting provider know if you're going to pen test their partner, pen test their environment. I'd appreciate it because of that. I do have blocks in place to prevent any of that from actually impacting our environment, but it still chirps alarms because I monitor a lot of things going into our environment, and an unauthorized or a pen test that we've never heard about before sure looks like a real attack.
It does. It does. We had one and it was like 7 in the morning, and I'm in Central Time, Derek's on the West Coast, and I'm getting our internal monitoring alerts for application stack. They're blowing up. I'm looking at those. What is going on with that client environment? I go log in the environment and I'm looking at what's in there. And man, I was like, we're getting attacked. We're getting attacked. Oh, what's going on? Derek wakes up and goes, oh, somebody's pen testing. And I'm like, you're kidding
and
me.
I'm not pleasant when I wake
No,
up. I am not.
No.
I'm the
5 in the
least
morning for
pleasant
him.
person.
Yeah. I'm like, I didn't mean to wake you up, dude, but this something's going on. This is bad.
Yeah, and fortunately it wasn't bad. But remember, we're talking about do it yourself, and and Dixie cup and string. I always go back to that analogy because it's a really good one. You control yours, so you can hire people to do a pen test on your stuff, but you may or may not know on the other Dixie cup when or if they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So again, another thing, if you're doing it yourself, and one of the things that when we onboard clients, we do things like having that kickoff meeting and tell them, ask them, let us know. We're not, those people that are doing a pen test, it's not in their best interest to surprise us. It's in their best interest to let us know that they're going to be doing that so that we can allow it. We benefit from it when they do, because we get confirmation that we're doing it right. And we want to know if they've gotten something that's doing it wrong. So it's kind of, that reverse Polish notation kind of thing. If they will let you know, tell them that you want them to do that. Tell them that you want the results, and you'll stand by and watch, because you get the advantage of understanding if they have actually found something. One of the other things I want to mention, I want both of your comments on this. I don't do it because I don't, I don't deal with that stuff. But I've heard a lot of you guys talking about putting secrets in Mirth Connect channels.
Oh, var equals and it's AWS S3 bucket secret and it's in a code template.
It
And,
works though, Ron. It works right. Okay, now my system works.
DB password and it's in a code template or a channel. It's in a channel 500 times. We've seen that. Same password in a channel 500 times because they just keep replicating the channel, rinse and repeat. So that means they're not changing the password, right? Right. And how bad is that, Derek? Right? The password's been alive for 5 years, right? So that's a problem.
It's already problematic, even if you do it the appropriate way by
Right.
putting the passwords inside of the configuration map. Because if you have 12 instances, there are 12 different instances that you would have to go in and update the password. So even that way is better, but there are better ways to accomplish that as well, using
Yeah.
like a centralized secret manager to pull in those values and not store anything in the configuration map.
But I
Well,
mean, that is a great example of the difference between the DIY first cut, Billy Bob built bare metal instance, and, companies that are doing this stuff for a living, right? I mean,
yeah.
Derek is in the middle of an initiative right now where we are making huge enhancements to our secrets management, and they only live for a short term period of time. I have to go into a secrets manager to get the fresh password because the instance was restarted and it was changed, right?
Exactly.
So
So I was actually sneaking up on folks because I'm pretty sure that most, if not everybody on the call, to that question went, well, duh. Okay, so you know not to do that. You know not to tell people to do it. But do you know how to verify 6 months from now whether somebody has done stupid and actually done it?
yeah. There was actually a serious breach that came out of a GitHub check-in, and it was AWS S3 passwords that were in raw code. And it wasn't a Mirth Connect problem. It was an application somebody put on a public GitHub, and it had the secrets for an S3 bucket that released that into the wild. And of course, everybody and their brother started taking advantage of that S3 bucket for anything and everything, right?
So if you're going to do it yourself and you haven't already put a protocol in place that manages passwords from the very beginning, you probably should stop and pay attention to that right now, because with the best of intentions, engineers will do that. They won't know. And once they do it, you won't know.
Another one I've just been kind of thinking about tips and tricks here on things that maybe people don't realize on the DIY side. I'm coming from the DIY perception that you're a newer user, right? You're trying to evaluate whether or not this is going to do the job for you. You're trying to determine how much farther you want to take this. What is your real need? How big is it going to grow? One of the trick features that is also an evil feature is filtered messages. And many people don't understand the associated problem with filtering messages. I mentioned earlier that there was a 10-to-1 ratio typically in the average channel. You've got, raw, transformed, encoded, sourced, and then every destination has those. And then you have your maps, and then you end up with a filtered also. And so what folks will do is they'll get a common feed and they'll say, I don't want any of these AO8s. I'm not going to consume any of these AO8s. And they filter them. Well, if you're connecting to an Epic system, every time somebody touches a keyboard in an Epic system related to a client chart, it spits out an AO8. And so you get millions and millions of these AO8s. And if you filter all of those messages are ending up in your channel and in your database versus dropping your destinations. You drop the message on the floor. Don't do anything with it. Just let it go. And so folks will filter, and I've seen channels that had 50 destinations where they filter the message across 49 of the destinations. So that particular message pathway is a 60 to 70 copies of the message, because every one of those destinations gets a filtered copy of the message in the database.
So filter is a great tool, but oh
It's
man,
evil.
you can use
It's
it
evil.
wrong.
It's evil.
Oh boy.
Remove destination set.
Remove destination set, removed all except. Yeah. These are just some best practices that, when you are DIY in it, you don't even think about those things. You just see the feature sitting in there and you just go, oh, I'll just filter those. What's the big deal?
You don't understand, yeah, the underlying, how did that even work? How is that even functioning?
Yeah.
Yep.
So lots of costs associated with that when you got to be careful. Now that there are an awful lot of really good Mirth Connect engineers that are out there, but as you can see from what we're talking about here, it goes beyond a good channel engineer. There's a huge security aspect. There's a huge the IT sec aspect to it, and they really have to go like this in order for you to scale at all. So be very cognizant of all of those and plan your work and work your plan. To that end, I have, it's been a long while since I've had, frontline conversations with prospects. My job has morphed a little bit on that, but I do remember having multiple conversations where the argument was with regard to, well, Mirth Connect is open source and it's free, and Postgres is, and these other things are, so there really isn't any cost to it. So I don't want to spend the money for for outsiders to do it. We're going to do it ourselves. So yeah, everybody's thought that argument at one point or another. But I wanted to give just a handful of things that you should be considering from a management standpoint on DIY. And I'll watch my time here because we will end on time here. Just like we talked about DR, you need to make sure that you've got two capable humans that are doing the things that we talked about, that have a good skill set in both. I can't, there are plenty of, Billy went out for a long weekend and he got COVID and he's out. And the next thing you know, the main source who really knows what you're doing and how to keep things working is now been out for 2 weeks and is probably going to be out for another week unexpectedly. And what's the impacts of that? Obviously, you got to have a way out of the trap with regard to your resources from that standpoint. And don't think that the Derek's of the world can just step into the Ron's world or vice versa. They're two very different skill sets. And while they overlap a lot, they're different. And quite honestly, that's another characteristic that just popped into my head. You want them to have different rights and different accesses there, just as part of the management of risk. If everybody's got the same access just because they're on the team that is doing this, that's one that you should reconsider. I can tell you from a management standpoint, and Derek's smiling because he knows that that's a really bad thing. From a security standpoint, it is a big time. Are your engineers capable of really normalizing code for reusability? Copying a channel to the next one is easy. I can do it. That's not hard. Doing it correctly so that you're not replicating errors or inefficiencies, I can't do that. And you should really challenge whether your integration engineers can as well. Big issues right there. We see them all the time. I want to go on to hosting, but I'm also running out of time here very quickly. Any other thoughts on that one, Ron?
We just had an incident with a client. They had a guy on board on staff. To your point, they modified one of the connectors inside of Mirth Connect, and the guy left, and they were having a security problem with a client that was found through vulnerability, and they couldn't do anything about fixing or changing it because they had modified the connector internally in MC, and they were lost.
Yeah.
So again, things DIY, don't modify Mirth Connect. Don't modify Mirth Connect, just roll with it. And if you need something else, you need to go outside where you're going to get commercial support.
Yep. So in closing here, we do have some more topics. I may roll some of those into the next one as well.
I think we should.
Okay, well, because there are more topics here, and I think it's worthwhile. But and it's really worthwhile to have everybody know. So there are a lot of things here. I think the thing that I would say in wrapping all of this up to you is, if you are doing it and you're making the decision from a management standpoint that you want to do it yourself, good for you, and certainly do so. But do yourself a favor, figure out, whether it's Zen or somebody else, that you've got a way out of the trap if things are going badly. It just doesn't scale without that if you don't. So find yourself a third party that you can look to, again, whether it's Zen or anybody else. Because when the wheels come off, that's not the time to be figuring out what you're going to do. You've got to do it ahead of time. It is the top of the hour. We do end on time here. We will make some notes and create the extension of this one for the next. I didn't say that very well, but we'll bleed this over to part 3, as well as other topics as well. We appreciate everybody showing up for this. Hopefully it was worthwhile. We appreciate you doing it, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.